Going to talk about what we talked about today in class, which was the Korean War, which was really kind of the first conflict to derive in the Cold War. Now, remember, during the Cold War, we never actually fought a war with the Soviets, but we fought a lot of proxy wars to stop the spread of communism. Excuse me. So, so in 1948, after World War II, two warring factions in the Soviet Union were fighting, and I'm sorry, not the Soviet Union, but China were fighting, and these two were Chinese nationalist leader Zhang Jieshi, which is also known as Chiang Kai-shek, what we called him, and he was fighting a war with communist Chinese leader Mao Zedong. And the U.S. supported Kai-shek while the USSR supported Mao. And in 1948, Mao's forces defeated Kai-shek, and Kai-shek wanted the U.S. to intervene in its attempts to retake China, but the U.S. did not do this. And this made it so that 1/4 of the world's land was ruled by communists by 1949. So then the focus turns on the Korean Peninsula. Now the Korean Peninsula is obviously right now there are two countries, but it used to be just one country. So the Korean Peninsula was ruled by Japan prior to World War II. But since we had defeated Japan in World War II, it was decided that the U.S. and the Soviet Union would divide Korea at the 38th parallel, and the USSR would take North Korea, and the U.S. would take South Korea. So the Soviets installed a puppet government while the U.S. provided aid to South Korea. And a puppet government is basically a government that was installed in a country where they can, effectively control the country through means of its government. So in 1950, on June 25th, shortly after the Americans left, so the Americans set up a government in South Korea, and then shortly after they left South Korea, the North Koreans invaded South Korea. Now, within days, the North Koreans managed. This caught them by surprise, and so within days, the North Koreans managed to overtake the South Korean capital of Seoul. So the U.S. ended up getting involved. So Truman, who remembered the policy of appeasement, he remembered this, and he did not want it to lead to another Hitler. So he decided to get involved in the Korean War. Now, if you remember, appeasement simply means giving in to the demands of hostile nations. So while Truman did not get congressional approval, which he was required to do, he sent U.S. troops as occupation forces, not necessarily fighting forces. And in June of 1950, the United Nations Security Council approved a resolution to have the United Nations become involved in the war in Korea. So Douglas MacArthur, he was a hero in World War II, or he was considered a hero in World War II. And he was the commander of the overall United Nations forces in World War II. So he knew that the invasion of South Korea, because North Korea put all of their efforts into South Korea, so that this left North Korea vulnerable. So what he decided to do was launch a surprise attack on the North Korean port of Incheon. And when you cut off someone's supply lines, you're basically done. If you're able to cut off supply lines, you're basically done, because obviously the people fighting have nothing to fight with. So the attack helped turn the tide of the war in favor of the United Nations forces, and so the port of Incheon definitely helped us, and it was a successful battle. So the United States advanced further into North Korea after the Battle of Incheon, and the United States reached as far as the Yalu River. However, on November 25th, 1950, 300,000 Chinese troops were deployed, and they attacked the South Koreans' positions. And because of this, the U.S. was forced to retreat. So MacArthur thought that this war could only be won if we invaded China, which Truman did not want to do. So MacArthur, upset about not invading China, he sent a letter to House Republicans criticizing Truman's policies. And for this, Truman relieved MacArthur of his command for insubordination. So here were the outcomes of the Korean War. By spring of 1951, Allied troops stabilized their positions at the 38th parallel. 38th parallel, again, was the map where they decided that would divide North and South Korea. Now, this is called a stalemate, and a stalemate is basically nobody has won the war, nobody has lost the war. It's basically a draw. So this became an issue in the 1952 election between Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson. And Eisenhower campaigned on ending the war in Korea. So when Eisenhower was elected, peace talks failed, and Eisenhower hinted he could possibly have used nukes if needed. Obviously, we don't want to do this now. And after the death of Stalin in 1953, the USSR agreed to a ceasefire. The ceasefire is still in effect today. So technically, the U.S. is still at war with North Korea. There's just no battles going on because of the ceasefire agreement. So until this day, North Korea remains a strong ally with Communist China. South Korea remains a strong ally with Western countries. North Korea remains divided at the 38th parallel. And this is what set the stage for something called the domino effect, or the domino theory, saying that they believe that the fall of communism would cause a domino effect, allowing for communism to fall throughout the regions, which it ultimately would, which we'll get into later. This gave birth to something called SEATO. By 1960, there were more than 1 million troops stationed overseas. And so they came up with something called the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, which is a lot like NATO. SEATO was a defensive alliance aimed at preventing the spread of communism, and its members included Pakistan, Thailand, the Philippines, Australia, New Zealand, France, Britain, and the U.S. Okay, so that's all for now. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you so much.